Good day, beleaguered boarders. I'm Unsilent. And what happened to dignity? Did it go away again? Just like some worn-out trend? Will I still defend emotions? What happened to honesty? I don't see it on the top 10. I only see it in what has been, 'cause I still defend devotion. Am I alone? Clearly, I'm not. The Tony Hawk franchise is among the most popular in all of gaming. Sure, it went off the rails for a decade there, but Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and its myriad sequels were, and still are, fondly regarded games that are still talked about and played today. Last year, I posited the creation of a series of videos examining games that defined the 90s, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater was among the first dozen that came to mind, such as the popularity of the game and its influence on gaming and pop culture as a whole. It's not a surprise that the PS1 era Tony Hawk games got a commercially popular and critically acclaimed remake in 2020. It's also not a surprise that Pro Skater 3 and 4 were next to get a remake, even if it took 5 years to happen. What is a surprise is how much publisher Activision is willing to half-ass the second Tony Hawk remake. We don't talk about Pro Skater HD. As the Pro Skater 4 portion of the remake is just wedging that game's levels and main single-player campaign into the same format as the Pro Skater 1 and 2 remake. While that might work for Pro Skater 3, its direct successor was a very different game. But we actually already have some options to deal with this thanks to the modding community. In fact, we have several ways of playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 without dropping $60+ on a remake that isn't really a remake. So to help save you time, money, and emotional damage from the Iron Galaxy developed Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and 4, I took a look at all the updates and mods that the community has made to help you play Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 in this episode of the Retrospective. Hello, and welcome to the Retrospective, a series in which I look back at games that I've played. This is not really that, though. This week marks the release of the next entry-ish into the Tony Hawk's video game franchise, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and 4. Are we supposed to call it 3 and 4 or 3 plus 4? They spell it 3 plus 4, but that also makes it sound like one of those Kingdom Hearts games with the ridiculous titles. Anyway, 2020 saw the release of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1+2, which was a well-received remake of the first two Tony Hawk games with modern graphics and gameplay updates that was loved by longtime pro skaters and those new to the franchise. It took publisher Activision 5 years, but they finally realized that people still like the Tony Hawk games and that remake, so now they're cashing in with 3+4. But if you're changing the new game from what it was originally, is it really a remake? First, for those not familiar with the history of the Tony Hawk franchise, let's do a quick refresher. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater is, surprise, a skateboarding game. Coming off the rising popularity of the X Games and just months after Tony Hawk landed the first ever 900, Pro Skater wasn't just a great video game beloved by gamers and critics, it tapped into the culture of the time. Skateboarders were becoming celebrities, Tony Hawk was a household name, extreme sports were getting mainstream attention on ESPN and being added to the Olympics, punk and ska were being played more on the radio, 90s counterculture was mainstream, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater brought that to your living room. Each entry in the Tony Hawk franchise is anchored by the career mode, its main single-player campaign that you'll spend most of your time grinding. Skateboard pun! The first 3 Tony Hawk Pro Skater games featured a consistent career mode. You would be given 2 minutes to complete a list of goals. They were generally achieve a high score, collect the letters of the word skate, interact with some objects, and find a secret tape. Complete enough goals and you unlock the next level, and onwards you progress until you complete all the levels. Each of the first 3 Pro Skater games tweaked the formula ever so slightly. The first game had only 5 goals per level, except in competition levels where you had to finish on the podium against the AI. The second increased that to 10 goals per level, and Pro Skater 3 is basically the same as 2 but prettier with the jump to the 6th generation consoles. With Pro Skater 4, developer Neversoft changed the game. And I do mean that in a literal way, not just metaphorical. They didn't make just a little tweak to the career mode. It was a full-on reinvention of it. You see, gone was the 2-minute timer, and in its place was a new career mode format that gave you whole levels to explore at your leisure. Inside each level were characters to give you goals, replacing the text goal list in the load screen from the previous games. As a result, the fast-paced, more arcadey experience of the first 3 Pro Skater games' career modes was turned into an open-world experience in a sports game. Now, the timer didn't completely go away. Some goals are time-limited, such as completing a high score run, collecting items, or performing tricks as they pop up on the screen. Some of the more outlandish goals don't have timers, but that's where there's some fun to be had. After all, the old 2-minute timer wouldn't have fit with games of tennis, skateboard luge races, or loop-de-loop long jump target practice. The timer also wouldn't have worked well with the NPC dialogue segments introducing goals or the cutscenes that might set up or conclude certain goals. After Pro Skater 4, the Tony Hawk franchise got a refresh with Tony Hawk's Underground. Using the new career mode from Pro Skater 4's starting point, Underground kept the free roaming level format along with NPCs to give you goals. However, Underground introduced a narrative-driven campaign as the main focus of its single-player mode, complete with a plot, cutscenes, and characters. Combined with a focus on a player-created character, new objective types, and larger levels, Underground was again another massive step forward in the franchise. The career mode was rechristened as the story mode, and was the core single-player campaign from Underground through Tony Hawk's Proving Ground. The release of the motion-controlled Tony Hawk Ride saw the plot of the story mode de-emphasized down to some full-motion video scenes to loosely tie the campaign together. At that point, the focus was really on the skateboard controller gimmick rather than a proper story mode. Even the much-maligned Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 had a version of free-roaming career. Sure, the story was removed from the career, and so were any characters to interact with, but they put some effort into the career mode. Didn't put sufficient effort into anything else, but one problem at a time with that game, and there are many, many, many problems with Pro Skater 5. Now, it's not like the 2-minute timer completely disappeared. In Underground 2, American Wasteland, and Project 8, there was Classic Mode. That was a single-player mode similar to the Pro Skater 1 through 3 career modes, with a list of 10 goals that you were to complete during a 2-minute time window. It wasn't in substitute of those games' story modes, but an additional mode for you to sink your teeth into in addition to the narrative campaign. It became a best-of-both-worlds situation for gamers, as you got 2 significant single-player modes for the price of 1. And that brings us back to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3+4. This so-called remake is overhauling the original Pro Skater 4 career mode so that it's in line with the older Tony Hawk's Pro Skater single-player experience. That is to say that instead of the original free-roaming career experience, you get the classic 2 minutes to tick off as many goals as you can. Or to put it another way, rather than actually, faithfully, and accurately remake Pro Skater 4, Iron Galaxy and especially Activision cheaped out, took a shortcut, and nobody's happy.
95? Alright, maybe not 95, but maybe like 70% of the identity of 4 over all the other games is the career mode. And they're just not doing it.
Activision, they lied. I don't really know any other way to say this.
I spent so much of my childhood and teenage years playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 on PlayStation 2 and loving it. And they've ruined it.
To say that the reaction to this massive change to 4 went over like a lead balloon would be a wild and dangerous understatement. The reaction was not just overwhelmingly negative, it was a unanimously negative reaction. Maybe this will turn out to be fine. No, I'm not saying it will be, I'm just saying it's a possibility, like waking up to the sudden heat death of the universe tomorrow. But no one is willing to give Activision the benefit of the doubt on this one. The problem isn't that fans are looking at Pro Skater 4 through rose-colored glasses. After all, they have their criticisms of the original game. No, part of the issue is the bait and switch from the faithful remakes featured in 2020's Pro Skater 1 and 2 to this half-hearted effort for 3 and 4. As I mentioned earlier, it's a Pro Skater 4 shaped peg being jammed in a Tony Hawk 1+2 hole. There's also the problem of most of the marketing showing Pro Skater 3 levels, which makes Pro Skater 4 feel like an afterthought. And rather than acknowledge the issue in a way that will assuage concerns, Activision has almost stoked the flames among fans through the so-called gaming press and social media. Sure, it's like a return of classic mode, but that means that 3+4 is not actually a remake of the game fans grew up with and loved. So let's say that you, quite understandably, don't want to hand Activision $60 or your regional equivalent for a half-assed remake of your favorite or at least a beloved Tony Hawk game by a developer with a concerning record outside of their own small indie projects. What are your options then? It seems that you'll need to do it yourself. Fortunately, you're not the only one that has wanted to keep Pro Skater 4 alive for the last 23 years. The gaming and modding communities have been hard at work on this for a long while now. The easiest way to play Tony Hawk 4 is through emulation. You can emulate the 6th generation of console on your phones now, so it's not like you need the original consoles or even a decent PC to play the console releases of this golden age of Tony Hawk games. It's literally in the palm of your hands. All you need to do is install an emulator, do a little bit of setup work, obtain a copy of Tony Hawk 4, and away you go. So long as you have a controller that adequately replicates the original console, which isn't really hard since controller design has converged since the PS1's dual analog controller was released in 1997, there are enough options to increase and decrease the visual fidelity of the emulated game to make it playable on just about any compatible machine. And I say machine because you can run emulators on phones and tablets now, so you don't even need a computer or controller to use a game console emulator. As someone who played a good number of Tony Hawk games on PS1 and PS2, this felt the most natural way for me to approach playing Pro Skater 4. Sure, there's the occasional hiccup in terms of graphics or frame rate, but so long as you have a copy of the game and a decent enough computer, it's a relatively easy and straightforward way of playing this, or really any PS1 or PS2 game, in 2025. Oh, and speaking of emulation, I should probably mention that there was a PlayStation 1 version of Tony Hawk 4. That version of the game, developed by Vicarious Visions, also had this free-roaming setup as its career mode. Even the Game Boy Advance port of the game had open-world levels and various goals defined in them. It just amazes me that they could properly implement this career mode in 2002 on a console powered by AA batteries. But with the comparatively infinite computing power of 2025, Activision can't be bothered. I realize that this says more about the decision makers behind today's games than the people making them or the games themselves, but it's a real kick in the nuts to fans of the franchise. Now, you probably thought that I was going to say that the easiest way of playing Pro Skater 4 today was on PC. The problem is that older games don't always work well with modern hardware and software, and games that were released in the 2000s tend to be the worst offenders, anecdotally speaking. However, THPS4 actually isn't too bad when you load it up on PC. It can install and run without any tricks required, like fan patches, compatibility mode, or graphics wrappers. That said, it doesn't work perfectly. In terms of resolutions, the PC port is limited to the common resolutions and aspect ratios of 2003, but will stretch itself awkwardly on your definitely not 4x3 monitor so everyone looks as fat as Scott Steiner's worst nightmares. The graphics also include a heavy dose of fog to reduce the workload on the older hardware as less of a level is rendered. And controllers may not necessarily work well. Xbox controllers are on the X input API, which definitely doesn't play well with games of this vintage, so not all inputs will be recognized like the D-pad and triggers. A PlayStation controller, which runs on the Direct Input API, should work better. Alternatively, you can try using the keyboard, which takes what would be your face and shoulder button inputs on a controller and maps them to the number pad. I'm an accountant, and my life is dependent on my number pad skills, and even I found this impossible to wrap my head around. Running the vanilla out-of-the-box version of Tony Hawk 4 on PC is perfectly serviceable, but that's the highest accolade that you can probably give it. Let's suppose for a second that you're dead set on playing the PC version of Pro Skater 4. Maybe you have a copy of the original PC release, or you just can't get your emulator to work optimally. You aren't just limited to the original release as the only way to play it. While the vanilla PC version gets the job done, what if you want something approaching modern expectations? That's where the modding community comes in. You could throw a hodgepodge of mods at the game to get it working by modern standards, but there is one mod that you can use to handle most of what you want updated with THPS4. Called the PartyMod by PartyManX, this mod was built to fix major issues with all of the Tony Hawk franchise releases on PC, from Pro Skater 2 through American Wasteland. At its core, the PartyMod series fixes major bugs, adds controller support for modern controllers, and increases resolution options to work with modern monitors, along with some game-specific fixes tailored to each release. For example, you can get rid of that pesky fog that I mentioned earlier. What results is a version of the game that is just as functional as when it was released. The downside is that it doesn't have the same level of portability as the emulated version. You need to have a PC to be able to run the PC version. At least the mod is very easy to install and set up. But PartyMod is still built on and limited by the technological underpinnings of the original game. In addition to playing the original Pro Skater 4 with or without mods, some of the more recent Tony Hawk games have been touched up by the THPS community to include Tony Hawk 4 content as an add-on. The next 3 ways to play Pro Skater 4 content are all mods of existing Tony Hawk games. However, I'll preface this by saying they don't bring the full gameplay experience into these other games. There's no career mode, no classic mode even. It's just tree skate and 2-minute runs. First up is a mod called THUGPro. Fans of the franchise already know I'm going to say that THUG stands for Tony Hawk's Underground. We've already mentioned it in this video. But actually, THUGPro is played through Tony Hawk's Underground 2 on PC. The mod adds a number of maps to the game beyond just those included in the base game. If I was to describe THUGPro using a term I've heard bandied about for other mods, I would call this a total conversion mod for Underground 2. There really isn't much left from the original release of Thug 2. It takes the base game and effectively replaces it with an experience that lets you skate through most of the maps from Pro Skater 1 through Project 8 in free skate and 2-minute high score modes. What THUGPro is built around is online play. Using OpenSpy as a replacement for the old online multiplayer built around the now-defunct GameSpy, you can join various lobbies playing a variety of game modes on all sorts of official and custom maps. Without a story or classic mode to grind through, and with there only being so many times that you can freely explore a level, the game is pointing you towards online play. The problem is that when I checked it out during the evening and weekends, there were maybe a couple dozen people online and maybe 2 games that were actually populated. Up to this point, I've made a few mentions of wedging Pro Skater 4 into the same format as the previous remake. Before Activision tasked Iron Galaxy to do that, modders did that for them. THPSPro is a mod for 2020's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1+2, so this actually could be as close to the Pro Skater 3+4 experience as you could get without actually buying and playing it. The mod contains most of the levels from Pro Skater 3 through Project 8, with the exception of American Wasteland, which we will circle back to shortly. When including the levels in the base game, THPSPro becomes an extensive catalog of the first 7 years of the Tony Hawk franchise. Similar to THUGPro, your gameplay options are limited to free skate and classic 2-minute runs. However, at this stage of the mod's development, there is no multiplayer. There is a note that says multiplayer is in a work-in-progress pre-alpha state, so it might be available eventually. My major concern with THPSPro is that because 3+4 appears to be using a lot of the same technical underpinnings as 1+2, and given recent history with other major publishers, I worry that THPSPro could be a target of a DMCA takedown because it might encroach too much on the proverbial territory that 3+4 seeks to claim. And if not here, then if Activision ever goes forward with the logically inevitable underground game remakes, we may see DMCA takedowns then. And last but certainly not least, is what a lot of Tony Hawk fans consider the best mod in the franchise, ReTHAWed, which is a major overhaul for Tony Hawk's American Wasteland by 10K Rising and THPS GOAT. Even just booting it up, the effort is obvious. You can select skating physics, control schemes, and available tricks to match different games in the franchise or to fit your personal preferences. On top of that, you can select characters from every game in the franchise, including those released after American Wasteland hit store shelves. And while the level list isn't as extensive as THUGPro or THPSPro, you still have most of the levels from the franchise with more added in regularly. Or you could always go online to find community-made add-on maps that are as simple to install as dragging and dropping into ReTHAWed's mods folders. Between the original game, the mods content, and community add-ons available, it's the most customizable mod that I played. Conveniently in time for this video, the ReTHAWed team recently dropped their version 4.3 update, which included the entire slate of Pro Skater 4 maps. Like the other modded games in this list, it's not a one-to-one replacement for THPS4's career mode. Yet. They included a few of the game's original goals to complete in Free Skate, which is a nice touch. Given their frequent updates, I wouldn't be surprised if the modders find a way to keep upgrading these maps to add more goals. There's also hope from the multiplayer side of things. While the multiplayer's goal attack mode lacks a goal list for the Pro Skater 4 maps, some of the newly added Pro Skater 3 maps do have goals added. Given that, it's safe to assume that the THPS4 maps will be updated with those soon enough. Like THUGPro, ReTHAWed has a healthy online community, but the population seems to be in line with THUGPro. I'm not sure if my timing is off or I need to scour the community Discord servers to find peak hours to go online. What sets ReTHAWed apart from the other mods is that it has the original single-player modes intact in the form of American Wasteland Story and Classic modes for you to play through. One community assessment that I saw for ReTHAWed is that while it's more focused on the single-player experience than THUGPro, it seems to have replaced THUGPro in all aspects of gameplay. Given the track record of this mod team, it wouldn't be surprising if those minor concerns that I noted previously get addressed eventually. While it's not a complete replacement for Pro Skater 4, between the added maps, classic content, and ongoing improvements, it's the biggest and most well-rounded mod of the bunch. I went into this exercise in a similar mindset to when I did this for Star Wars Dark Forces last year. I wanted to see what options were out there for people to play one of their favorite games without spending more than they should reasonably be asked to. Fortunately, most of the potential solutions here revolve around abandonware and community-made tools, so the price ends up being right. The exception being Pro Skater 1+2, which you can find regularly discounted down to $15 or 75% less than the price of the 3+4 remake. And much like that previous exercise with Dark Forces, I find myself torn between a few options, with the best one really dependent on what your goal is when it comes to playing Pro Skater 4 in 2025. Each of the options available have their pluses and minuses. The only one I would personally dismiss would be THUGPro, because there's no meat on those bones unless your primary interest is online play. So which of these mods and updates are actually worth your time in 2025? For my money, or I suppose lack thereof, because I don't want you spending money unnecessarily, the best option is using PartyMod with the PC port of Pro Skater 4. It's the best way to play a faithful Pro Skater 4 experience today, with the full career mode, all the original features, and even access to online play. From a technical perspective, Installation is straightforward, getting the game launched is easy, and the game runs smoothly, which isn't always something an emulator can boast. PartyMod also has the added benefit of making similar improvements to the other PC releases in the Tony Hawk franchise, so if THPS4 isn't your favorite game in the franchise, you can get any release from Pro Skater 2 through American Wasteland running properly on modern hardware. Now, if the career mode isn't your top priority, but just the content like levels and skaters, I would be looking at ReTHAWed. It's the most complete Tony Hawk experience of any of the mods, or even the actual Tony Hawk games that I looked at in making this video. The 2 single-player modes are certainly a big plus over the other major mod projects, even if Pro Skater 4 content isn't really included in them. But with ReTHAWed actively expanding its content, it may not be long before it becomes a true all-in-one solution for fans of the series. Add in the updater utility and mod manager built into ReTHAWed's launcher, and it's probably the most user-friendly community update that is available, which is a major plus for people as technologically challenged as I can be. But on the whole, regardless of how you tackle playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater in 2025, it still holds up. While I might prefer the story mode style of single-player campaigns in later games, it's still a nice change of pace from the classic 2-minute objective attack style of gameplay from the original Tony Hawk trilogy. You can see this being an evolutionary game in terms of game design as Neversoft figures out how they can push the 6th generation console technology in terms of level and goal design, and that again bleeds into the next games. And of course, the soundtrack is a highlight of this game, but you can say that about most Tony Hawk games. Pro Skater 4 is still a great experience on its own, but it's also an interesting time capsule for the series. And that will do it for this look at the community-made updates to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 and how you can continue playing that classic. Even if you don't go the direction I went with this, maybe there's something in here for you to try out so you can play Pro Skater 4 until 3+4 is updated, or maybe just deeply discounted. So until we see you again for more looks at classic video games, I'm Unsilent. Thanks very much for joining me. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you're new, share on social media, follow on social media. The social media handle is Unsilent On Air for Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and more. And don't forget, there's plenty more deep dives into the classic and not-so-classic games in the playlists there on the screen, in the description down below, and more videos anytime on the channel page. And until the next time, I'm Unsilent. Thanks very much for joining me. Like, share, subscribe, and we will see you next time.